Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In the last episode of Blazor Train, I gave you a conceptual framework for how Blazor works in .NET 8. In this episode, we're going to take a first look at actually using Blazor in Visual Studio running .NET 8 Preview. All right, no more blah-de-blah, let's get to it. Blazor 8 is coming up right now, right here on Blazor Train. Okay, so all I've done here is I didn't install the .NET 8 SDK. I just went to Visual Studio Installer and I made sure to install the Preview 17.8 Preview 2. Obviously, you might be watching this after the release or a different preview, but this is the first preview that I've actually run with Blazor on .NET 8. And of course, you need to make sure when you install it that ASP.NET and web development is selected as a workload. So when you create a new project and search for Blazor, you're going to see a few things here. You're going to see a Blazor server app, a WebAssembly app, and empty versions of those, but you'll also see this, Blazor Web App. So this is the project for creating a Blazor Web App that supports both server-side rendering and client interactivity. And as I said in the last video, you don't even have to turn that on unless you want to. So the first thing you'll notice is that the structure of the template is different. Now instead of having a shared folder, we have a components folder, which makes sense to me because these are non-routable components. Right? Main layout, nav menu, that's fine. But I also want to put my things in here, like components that I write that I want to use on pages. And of course, you have under components, you have a pages folder. These are your routable pages. And then, of course, you've got the system level Razor files as well. So if you look at the pages folder, there's no index anymore. It's called Home. And that's good. And also weather instead of fetch data. Counter is still counter. I've added this form demo razor that I'm going to show you in a minute. But let's take a look at App.razor. Okay, so in a WebAssembly application, you have index.html. In a Blazor server application, you have _host.cshtml. And that's where usually the header stuff goes and the body goes. Now it's in App.razor. And that's good because I haven't picked a hosting model, right? Now what's routes? Well, you remember the stuff that was in App.razor? The router? That is now in routes. Makes sense. _imports.razor is, the same as it was before. No big deal there. MainLayout.razor looks very familiar, except now you've got the error UI in MainLayout, which is good. For the nav menu, I've added my forms demo to it. Now let's look at Home. Now, do you remember in the last episode where I gave you a conceptual framework, an overview of Blazor in .NET 8, and it doesn't require a SignalR circuit? And just to show this, I've put together a little demo that uses code to make a sentence from a string array containing words. Okay, that's all there is to it. So I can run this and I shouldn't see any SignalR circuits. All right, so I'm going to press F12 I'm going to go over to the network. Cache is disabled. Let's refresh. And what? 2 WebSockets right there. So I asked the ASP.NET team, what's up with that? And the answer is that these are for the tooling that Visual Studio installs. If you really want to see what it looks like, run it from the command line. So go to the command line, say .NET run, and here's my URL. Pull it up in Chrome, press F12, network, refresh, and look ma, no signal R. That's really cool. So what it means is that this data is coming from code that ran on the server, but it did not require any signal R circuits whatsoever. There is no interactivity. It's just generating HTML. But the difference is that I can do that now from components. I can get data from a database. I can make API calls. I can munge together the response, and it renders. Done. So what happens if I go to Counter? Well, now I see a WebSocket because we have interactivity here. Take a look at the code. Right there, attribute RenderMode server. That means this page requires a circuit. If there's one available, it'll be used. If not, it'll be started. Now I can use RenderMode server because in program CS, I said add server components and also add server render mode. But next, let's go to Weather, which used to be fetch data, and check out this attribute, streaming rendering. So that says, hey, I want all of this stuff to stream down, and then I'm going to load some data on initialized. I'm going to delay for half a second to simulate loading something from a database or whatever, and then we're going to display the weather forecasts. So we're still running from the command line here. Going to go to Weather, and you saw that it waited a little bit. Well, it's because of that half a second that simulates loading something in the background. But you'll notice that all of the setup code and the loading statement, that renders immediately. All right, let's look at my forms demo. Now, do you remember when I said in the last episode that you can do forms processing without requiring a circuit? Yeah, that's what's happening here. So here's what we have. We have our edit form. You need to give it a name. Doesn't matter what it is. We have our model, just like we normally do in our onValidSubmit. I have a data annotations validator. I have a validation summary. And on ValidSubmit, I'm calling customer signed up. Where's that? Well, it's right down here on the server without signal R. So I have my new customer right here with supply parameter from form. That's an absolutely necessary attribute. And that new customer is my model. I've got a private string message that I'm showing right here. And when the customer signed up, I say message is thank you, whatever the customer first name is. And I've just got a customer record here. The first name is required, the email address is required, and it's also an email address. So let's check it out. Go to Forms, refresh. Do you see any WebSocket there? No. So here's my first name. Here's my email. I'm going to try to sign up without providing an email, and we get all the validation that we had before. I'll do some garbage for the email. Sign up. Not a valid email address. And there you go. A round trip. And look, ma, no signal R. But how do we do WebAssembly? Look at this. If I go to Counter and I say render mode WebAssembly and try to run this, gonna have an issue. So there's two parts to this. One, I don't have the appropriate middleware and settings here, but also in this current version, some code needs to be written a little bit differently. So let's create a new project. Blazor Web App, doesn't matter what I call it, but on this next screen, I need to select this guy, use interactive WebAssembly components. This is for server-side rendering. This is for WebAssembly rendering. Now watch what happens. Two projects. What? Well, let's take a look in Components, Pages, Counter. This is a temporary workaround until Map.razor Components supports add additional assemblies. Once that is implemented, the main project won't need to include this file. So we have a reference from Blazor App 1 to Blazor App 1.client, and in there we've got the Counter page. And it's set to render mode auto, but I don't have to do render mode auto. I can do render mode web assembly. And again, I'm going to run this at the command line. I'm going to say .NET run. There's my URL. All right, here we go. Let's go to Counter. And all the WebAssembly stuff comes down because that's what we asked for. And look, we also have a WebSocket. I'm not sure why, because we said render mode WebAssembly. Anyway, there it is running in WebAssembly. Now let's change it to render mode auto, and it'll start out with a WebSocket with a Blazor server circuit, and then end up using WebAssembly. Okay, go to Counter. So what happened is, it started off as Blazor server, everything WebAssembly downloaded in the background, and now we're using WebAssembly. That's a first look at Blazor in .NET 8. It's only going to get better from here, but I encourage you to download the preview version and take it for a spin. Now back to you in the studio, Carl. You know, even though it's still a little rough around the edges, I think you'll agree that we've got a lot of Rails to ride in the coming months. Stick with me. I'm just the conductor for the job. Hey, thanks for riding the Rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time. Blaze the train!